Well, let's get talking. Nigeria, an African country on the Gulf of Guinea with many natural landmark and wildlife reserves, protected areas such as Cross River National Park and Yankari National Park, has waterfall, dense rainforest, savanna, and of course, all this makes it a unique destination to explore. The country is known for its oil production, business spirit, and cuisine. It is the residence of some African wealthiest men. Apart from petroleum, Nigeria's other natural resources includes natural gas, tin, iron ore, coal, limestone, to mention but just a few. Despite all of these natural resources, the nation's total public debt to gross domestic product ratio for December 31st, 2022 stood at 23.2%. According to Debt Management Office, our total public debt stood at about 46.25 trillion naira. That's about 103 billion US dollars at the end of December 2022. Today, we'll be analyzing our debt profile amid revenue challenge, and most especially and importantly, the possible way out of this. What are the options that we have? Well, joining me to do this is the co-founder and chief executive of Budget Nigeria, Mr. Seun Onigbinde. He joins me from the United States of America. Thank you so much. It's really good to see you.
It's a pleasure, Tolu. I'm excited and I'm honored to be here. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Okay, let me start with this line of thought so that I get what your reaction would be. Now, a country that services its debt and it exceeds about 30%, well, that country is already in trouble. But for a country that is spending almost 100% of its funds or revenue to sort out debt, what would you say that country, where is the country drifting to? What's your take with regards to these figures? They are scary. 77, if we are adding the ways and means, we're talking about 77 trillion naira for a country of 200 million people.
I mean, thank you very much. If you look at our debt ratios, by the time you look at it from a perspective of the GDP, it's around 35% of the GDP. At the point in time where, I mean, if you go back 10 years ago, we're less than 20%. So it's climbing up. We continue on this trajectory, within under 8 years, we will be around 50 to 60% of our GDP. So definitely that's a big problem. When we look at ourselves in context of other countries, we might not look like a problem because there are other countries in Africa like Ghana, Kenya, who have far higher debt to GDP than Nigeria. Or even when you look at even advanced countries like USA, Japan, I mean, Greece, I mean, those ones can even be as high as 100, 200% of their GDP. But the question is also not just that angle of GDP, because GDP is the size of the economic value of activities in your country. You also have to look at the revenue. How much revenue are you taking? How much taxes? How much earnings are you making from the entire value being produced in your country? And if you look at it, our revenue is grossly weak, very, very weak, because we're using around 70 to 80% to service debt. And this is a big problem because there is no country, I mean, as fiscal analyst, I've not looked at any country that uses where maybe central government is spending around 70 to 80% to service debt. Even countries like the United States, where debt to GDP is over 120%, they use around 23 to 25% of their revenue to service debt. So by the time you look at Nigeria, it's too high. It is not sensical. And it just speaks to a problem. We just don't have enough revenue. Or number two, we're not growing debt in a way that advances revenue. There's a way you grow debt into a situation, or you put them into investment or into environments that are meant to generate further revenue for you, either FX or even local currency. But if you just borrow haphazardly, just because you're doing a reserve management, or you're just trying to do a balance of payments management, or maybe just because you heard that there's dollar somewhere, or you just go ahead and do that, then that will have significant implications down the line. Also, a lot of our payments are going to be due in the next few years. So definitely there will be a lot more pressure on this not just debt service payments, also maybe on even actual payments of this debt, except the federal government chooses to roll over some of this debt, which might not even be easy, especially when you look at it from the Eurobond perspective. It might be easy for local debt, but for Eurobonds, if you want to roll over the interest rate at high levels, that is not even reasonable for any government to attempt such markets. So for me, I feel we have boxed ourselves into this corner just because, one, we have not demonstrated enough capacity or strategy to grow public revenues, and two, we also not have enough productivity in the system.
So let me take it up from there. You know that interest rates are rising across the board and currencies are also being battered all around. So this would also, one way or the other, increase debt rates.
Yes. Interest rates CBN has been doing this monetary policy rate increase in marginal forms and thinking that is going to stem inflation by curtailing money supply, but it's not working because you are giving with the left hand, you are taking with the right hand. You are the same one pumping money through ways and means into the hands of the fiscal authorities, beyond reasonable amounts. You are the same one trying to also take money from the monetary authorities, the banks, by raising rates and by discouraging lending. So I don't think at the end of the day, the money supply in the economy keeps rising, either wherever flow or wherever way that flow is coming from. And that has not even stopped in any way. And unfortunately, the one that's been given to government over the years, we did not properly structure it, but now we've structured it. The Senate has approved the securitization. The CBN is going to owe those money on its books as loan to the federal government in the next 40 years. Payments will not start in the next 3 years. It gives a bit of reprieve to the incoming administration, at least, that it will not pay debt over the 23.7 trillion naira, the securitization for the next 3 years. But what happens after then? Would we have grown our revenue significantly so that we're able to start making those payments to the CBN? And this channel that we have opened, which is ways and means, because after the 23.7 trillion naira that was securitized, the federal government has gone ahead to borrow nothing less than 3 to 4 trillion naira from the CBN again. So what happens to that? Does it mean that we continue securitization? Where is the end in all of this? What's the impact of all of this in our bond markets and the depth of even our capital markets? Those are the questions that we need to ask. The questions that we have to do the hard work. The hard work. And that hard work is that we have to be a productive economy. For example, we're trying to borrow $800 million from the World Bank. That's not a lot of money. If you do 500,000 barrels of oil and you have $30 profit on that alone, and you do that for 2 months, you have around $900 million. So it's just for us to get productive as a country and to be able to have the framework to be able to take taxes and for them to be able to take revenues out of it. If we keep going through this mismatch, there will be challenges also. And the way the challenge, as you can see, is inflation. 22% inflation is still galloping. Food inflation is around 24%. You can see the exchange rate volatility still remains being there. So these are the challenges that we'll continue to face as long as we don't allow monetary systems or fiscal systems to run the way they are supposed to run.
Let's talk productivity now, Sheung. I think this is very important that we address this issue. How more productive can we be? Infrastructure would obviously aid productivity. So where are we and what are your expectations? The last time we got the figures from the NEPC, the non-oil exports, some billions of dollars. And the central bank is saying that there are even some deals being done that are not remitted. So what do you think? How can we improve productivity to that level that it will be significant?
I think it's more about how we apply our thinking. First of all, like you said, infrastructure critical. So how do we strengthen infrastructure to transport goods and services and port infrastructure? How do we ease the export process? How do we ease the process of doing business? Access to credit. I mean, even if CBN keeps raising MPR rates and it's no longer affecting on the inflation, maybe they should stop. Because if people are borrowing at 28, 29%, and on what mechanics are they going to be able to turn profit around our environment? So some sort of way that it seems that like that line is broken, is faulty. So there has to be a way for us to think through about, one, the policy environment for people. If we keep running these dual exchange mechanisms where we have like a gap of like $300 in there, then there's going to be a challenge for even people honestly repatriating funds into the economy. So that's something that has to be looked into. The ease of doing business framework. How is it easy for people to really do business in Nigeria? The third point I would also say heavily is to look at the infrastructure for export, the export infrastructure. Is it easy for people to access the port, to take their goods out of the country? Those are the things that you want to put on the table. And most importantly, it's also the skills base for us to be able to do all of these things. If we want to be an economy that is effective, that is thriving, we need to also invest in that long-term human capital development. If the skills are not available, then we cannot talk about productivity. Productivity is a function of human capacity, to turn out output with minimal resources, which includes time or even includes support of machinery. So we have to find the people, that have the required skills to participate in this current economy, and that means our look into education, vocational systems has to be up there. So for me, I think productivity has to be centered on one, export-driven productivity. How do we really build our non-oil base? If there's any metric the next government should be well adjudged on, is our non-oil export growth. And that's what a part of me likes the RT200 project of the CBN that is incentivizing export by giving them some form of support from the Naira, component, which is good. I think things like that needs to be much more broadened and expanded. The awareness needs to be much more strengthened, but most importantly, our productivity will rely on our ease of doing business, our access to export goods, and our skills and how we need to wrap up capacity in those areas.
Let me ask you this question now. News just in, my colleague just sent this in that President Buhari is asking for approval from the reps for the $800 million, which we've talked about. And the focus is the National Social Safety Net Program. Now, it's that program I want us to stay on, talking about addressing the vulnerable ones and all of that. What's your assessment of all of these programs? Before now, we had the likes of trader money, market money. We had some targeted at, farmers. We can go on and on, Shehu. You know what I'm talking about here. But what's the impact? Because the objective should be inclusive growth, which we are not really getting.
We're not getting that. We have 133 million people in multidimensional poverty. So if you spend, over ₦1 trillion, or even 1.5 trillion, if you add up how much has been spent on social safety net programs, these all cluster of programs that are meant to affect different segments of the economy. If you put all of that together, put around 1.5 trillion naira in spending over the years. And the question we're going to ask ourselves, has there been a specific objective assessment of the impact of this program, on poverty, on other elements that needs to be adjudged? Now, the $800 million is part of it is to support the social safety net offers, to do its programming. Part of it is also to alleviate the suffering from the removal of fuel subsidy. I don't think you borrowing $800 million to do that, those things are necessary or important. We want to build an industrial company. You're borrowing $800 million to build an industrial park, that's perfect. Borrowing $800 million to pipe gas to states and build industrial parks for them and be able to attract industrial growth in those environments. I would perfectly love that. That would complete the AKK pipeline forward. I would perfectly love that. If that's going to be us seed funding for another LNG train so that we can capture gas demand in Europe in the next 2 or 3, 4 years, I would love that. But if we're borrowing money for consumption, what's the whole purpose of that? We should be a country that's much more, we should be more logical in our approach. If we have a reserve management challenge, which means maybe we borrow all of this money because we need CBN to be able to show up, to reverse its current reserve position. And let's be honest about that. But for us to say we were borrowing money to give money to the poor or to give money to vulnerable people, are we going to give them dollars at the end of the day? No. So how we borrow money? People are going to pay in dollars, and where there is no self-liquidating receipts from that kind of environment, how we borrow money to do such kind of approach? It's for me, it lacks logic, and it doesn't just make sense for me in any direction. So for me, I believe we need to retune our focus to what's most important. And what's most important is that Nigeria needs to be a country that produces, and that starts from our efficiency in our agricultural sector. That starts from us rebuilding the engines and infrastructure that can make state governments more competitive. Power can be one of them, and also easing doing business in those environments. Those are things that we should focus upon. When the macroeconomic environment of the country is set, you see that the opportunities will become much more distributive. Then we can now look for where the gaps are, and then we now support those environments. The inflation is at 24%, and we keep giving money to the poor. It's as if you are pouring water inside a basket. You have to first set the macroeconomy right. When you set the macroeconomy right, inflation is low, exchange rate stability is in play. You have interest rate at a particular rate where people can reasonably borrow. When you set the macroeconomics right, when you fight to set the macroeconomy right, then you now look at where the gaps are, where the growth is not happening, where growth is not inclusive. Then you now fix those gaps. But we are trying to, pump money and say we're pumping money to the poor and the vulnerable in the underfunded or in the suboptimal macroeconomic environment. We can't get the results that we want. It's going to be like an exercise in futility, and the results are there when we say we've done all of this work. We see more people in multidimensional poverty. So we need to be honest with ourselves. Nigeria's answer is not just about spending money. Nigeria's answers, you will find them more in planning and in critical thinking about there has to be a process for us to be able to get the kind of results that we want.
So before I let you go, I want to talk about the options available. But I think you've identified that, yes, but you can still touch on that. Finally, if we are to do all of this right, a timeline, can we give a timeline? Let's say we are projecting for the new administration and we get all of this right, get the macroeconomic right, get inflation down, get productive. Can we give a timeline to some of the quick wins that we can achieve?
Some of them are, thank you so much. Some of them are going to be challenging because also that these things do not exist in a vacuum. We exist in a global macro environment. So definitely there are challenges here and there. But we have to be clear. And I think the first thing is finding a way to bring down food inflation. There has to be a critical study about what is driving food inflation. Because whatever we're trying to do, we want to remove fuel subsidy, we want to do different things. That has to be the first thing we need to tackle. If we think the supply chains are suboptimal, then we have to go ahead and fix that. If it's a storage issue, then we go ahead and fix it. If it's a supply issue, then we go back and fix that. So for me, I believe abundant supply of food and that a price where Nigerians can afford is something that we need to first prioritize as much as possible. Secondly, is now focus on the macroeconomy. How do we now, because food is a huge element when we are discussing the basket of the inflation basket of the country. So definitely, if you're able to bring food prices down, inflation will definitely come down. So if you want to do that, then you go ahead and fix the macroeconomy and looking at also the exchange rate stability. There was a time exchange rate, we know that it has been significantly devalued, and evidence also about the lack of productivity in the country. But most importantly, is also to have a bit of stability and a sense of degree of like this is the direction of where things would be at this point. So you now go and address the macroeconomy itself. Then you look at where the gaps are. That's the third thing for me. Where are the gaps where growth are not happening? If there are components of where growth are not happening, then you'll be able to say, okay, we can put inclusive growth there. If we're looking at people age maybe 65 and above where the gaps are, then we go ahead and do that. If it's because we don't have enough teachers, then we go ahead and fix things like that. If we believe that the civil service needs a bit of work, then we go ahead and fix it. So there has to be a much more learning and data-driven approach into our work. And I think the other thing is also to rebuild our social contract. We need to build a unified data system. That has been a unified data system that combines BVN, NIN, census numbers, INEC numbers, brings everything all together. We can have a holistic approach be able to even adequately increase our taxes, even from the current state of where we are. So those are the kind of framework I would say a government to do. And if you also allow me to add one more, is the state economies. Every time you see the federal government intervene in states, it's always about states can't pay salaries, so you give money to states to pay salaries. What happens to productive engines for a state? Because I hear things like this state is a civil service state, so which means when the civil servants are not paid, the economy of the state just collapses. The question is, things like that can't change. And how do you change that? You have the federal government also has to support states in branching out into new ideas, into new economies. If a state wants to build an industrial outlook, something that Ogun State has done over the years, based on its proximity to Lagos and access to gas resources, then you get all the more states to do that. So the state also have to be much more productive, because we can't just talk about we want to build a productive Nigeria. Technically, what we are mentioning is that we want to be productive states. So for me, I would center it on those things. Look at food inflation and put on ideas on agriculture, then look at macroeconomy, do what you have to do effectively there. Look at your non-oil growth. How do you exert non-oil export growth? Look at how do you grow, how do you improve skills within the economy effectively, and how do you build a single user-based system? And finally, my point is that Nigeria cannot do all of these things in 3, 4, 5, 6 years. No. There's a way we are running our country around democratic election cycles, and that there is no way we are going to achieve progress in that way, which means a government comes in and we're expecting it to do something in 4 years, and after 4 years, then we move on. No. Nigeria has to be a country that thinks in 10, 20, 30 years. We have to think long term. And every government must come and see itself in that agenda and believe that, okay, if I'm going to spend 8 years here, I'm spending my 8 years because of an agenda has been set about how the trajectory of this country would be. So something that also has to happen is we have to institutionalize some of the impact we want to make. We have to institutionalize them so that it's not just about a government comes. So if we want to say we want to produce 20% we want to be able to meet 10% of gas demand in Europe in the next 10 years, then we have to be able to institutionalize that so that it's not like somebody starts an AKK line and another government comes and doesn't concern itself about that, or someone is moving on some power, we're going to say we want to have 30,000 megawatts of power in another 10 years. Somebody knows that we are following a strategy. A lot of Nigerian problems also we do with short-termism, which means a government comes in 4 years and it goes away, and another one comes here and doesn't and sets up another new agenda entirely. So that's another thing that I want to see the next administration do effectively.
I must thank you so much there, co-founder, chief executive at Budget Nigeria. Thank you so much, Olusegun Onigbinde, for joining us. We really do appreciate this.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful time.